The bustling kitchen of Le Petit Jardin buzzed with its usual evening chaos. Sarah Matthews deftly balanced 3 plates of perfectly arranged salmon en croûte as she pushed through the swinging doors into the dining room. The crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the cream-colored walls, creating an atmosphere of understated elegance that had made the restaurant one of the most sought-after dining establishments in Manhattan. As she served the wealthy patrons their meals with practiced grace, her eyes couldn't help but drift toward the magnificent grand piano that stood in the corner of the dining room. The instrument's polished ebony surface gleamed invitingly, its presence both a comfort and a reminder of what she'd left behind. 10 years had passed since she'd last performed professionally, but her fingers still itched to dance across those ivory keys. "Table 7 needs their check, Sarah," Marcus, the floor manager, called out, snapping her back to reality. She quickly composed herself and headed to the register, her comfortable yet professional shoes clicking against the marble floor. At 28, Sarah had mastered the art of compartmentalizing her life. By day, she was a dedicated single, mother to 8-year-old Emma, spending her mornings helping with homework and packing lunches before dropping her daughter off at school. Her afternoons were divided between caring for her mother, Catherine, whose chronic illness required constant attention, and working her shifts at Le Petit Jardin. The restaurant job paid well enough, especially with tips from the wealthy clientele, but it barely covered the mounting medical bills and Emma's school expenses. Still, Sarah considered herself fortunate. The flexible schedule allowed her to be there for both her daughter and mother, even if it meant sacrificing her own dreams. That evening, the restaurant was hosting a private gala for some of the city's most influential people. The usual quiet ambiance had been replaced by the gentle murmur of sophisticated conversation and the occasional tinkle of crystal glasses. Sarah moved efficiently between tables, her brown hair neatly secured in a bun, her uniform pristine despite the long hours of service. As she approached a table near the piano to clear some plates, the sound of a throat clearing caught her attention. She turned to find Marcus gesturing urgently for her to come over. "Sarah, Mr. Hassan has specifically requested you for his table," Marcus whispered, his expression a mixture of anxiety and excitement. "He's one of our most important clients. Whatever he asks for, the answer is yes. Understood?" She nodded, smoothing her apron before approaching table 12. Karim Hassan's reputation preceded him. The Arab millionaire was known for his shrewd business acumen and demanding nature. His recent acquisition of several luxury hotels had been the talk of the financial district for weeks. As Sarah approached the table, she was struck by Hassan's commanding presence. He sat with perfect posture, his custom-made suit emphasizing his broad shoulders. His dark eyes, sharp and observant, seemed to miss nothing. Despite being in his early 40s, his salt-and-pepper hair and trimmed beard gave him a distinguished appearance that demanded respect. "Good evening, Mr. Hassan. How may I assist you?" Sarah's voice remained steady and professional, despite the intensity of his gaze. He studied her for a moment before speaking, his accent adding a rich texture to his words. "I've been watching you all evening," he said matter-of-factly. "You can't seem to take your eyes off that piano." Sarah felt her cheeks flush. She hadn't realized her longing glances had been so obvious. "I apologize if I've been distracted, sir. I assure you it won't affect the quality of service." A slight smile played at the corners of his mouth. "You play?" "I used to," she admitted, surprised by his interest. "Many years ago." Hassan's expression changed, showing a hint of curiosity. "Then perhaps you wouldn't mind entertaining us with a piece?" The request hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah's heart began to race. "Sir, I'm working. I couldn't possibly—" "I've already spoken with your manager," Hassan interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. "He agrees that some live music would enhance the evening's atmosphere." Sarah glanced around the room, suddenly aware that several nearby tables had turned their attention to their conversation. Marcus stood by the kitchen doors, nodding encouragingly. She could feel the weight of expectations pressing down on her shoulders. Her fingers trembled slightly as she considered the offer. It had been so long since she'd performed in public. The last time she'd touched a piano was at home, playing simple nursery rhymes with Emma on their old upright before they'd had to sell it to pay for her mother's treatments. But as she looked at the grand piano, something stirred within her. The memory of countless hours spent practicing, the joy of losing herself in the music, the sense of accomplishment when mastering a difficult piece, it all came rushing back. Taking a deep breath, Sarah straightened her shoulders and met Hassan's gaze. "What would you like to hear?" His eyes sparkled with interest. "Surprise me." With measured steps, Sarah approached the piano. The dining room had grown quieter, the guests' attention drawn to this unexpected turn of events. As she sat down on the bench, muscle memory took over. Her hands found their natural position above the keys, and she closed her eyes for a brief moment. When she opened them again, her fingers began to move, and the first notes of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major filled the air. The familiar melody flowed through her, years of training resurging as if they'd never left. Her body swayed gently with the music as she poured her heart into every note, forgetting for a moment about the watching crowd, her responsibilities, her struggles. In that moment, she was just Sarah, the pianist she'd always dreamed of being, letting the music speak. The words she could never say aloud. The final notes of the nocturne lingered in the air as Sarah's hands came to rest on her lap. For a moment, complete silence enveloped the dining room. Then, as if awakening from a collective trance, the room erupted in enthusiastic applause. Sarah felt her cheeks flush as she stood and gave a modest bow, trying to maintain her professional composure despite the thundering of her heart. As she turned to return to her duties, she found Karim Hassan standing beside the piano, his expression unreadable. "That was unexpected," he said, his voice carrying a hint of something she couldn't quite identify. "Where did you study?" "Juilliard," Sarah replied, straightening her uniform, "but I didn't complete my degree." Hassan's eyebrows rose slightly. "Juilliard doesn't accept anything less than excellence. Why did you leave?" Before Sarah could formulate a response, Marcus appeared at her side. "Mr. Hassan, I apologize for the interruption, but we need Sarah back in service. The dessert course is about to be served." "Of course," Hassan nodded, but his eyes remained fixed on Sarah. "We'll continue this conversation later." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of activity. Sarah could feel Hassan's gaze following her as she moved through the dining room, but she focused on her tasks, determined to maintain her professional dignity. As the last guests began to leave, Marcus called her to his office. "Sarah, Mr. Hassan would like to speak with you before you leave," he said, looking both excited and nervous. "He's waiting in the private dining room." Sarah found Hassan seated at a table, a leather portfolio open before him. He gestured for her to sit across from him. "Your performance tonight was remarkable," he began, "particularly for someone who hasn't played professionally in years." "Thank you, sir," Sarah replied carefully, unsure where this conversation was heading. "I'm curious about something," he continued, leaning forward slightly. "When you played, there was a depth of emotion that can't be taught. It comes from life experience, from struggle." He paused, studying her face. "Tell me, Miss Matthews, why did you really leave Juilliard?" Sarah hesitated, weighing her words carefully. "Life happened," she finally said. "My mother became ill during my second year. She needed care and the medical bills." She trailed off, not wanting to burden this stranger with her personal struggles. "And now you're a waitress," Hassan stated, not unkindly. "Supporting both your mother and your daughter, I presume." Sarah's surprise must have shown on her face because Hassan smiled slightly. "I make it my business to know things, Ms. Matthews. I've also learned that talent like yours shouldn't be wasted serving overpriced entrees to privileged people." He reached into his portfolio and withdrew a business card, sliding it across the table. "I'm organizing a cultural event at the Hassan International Hotel next month. It's a charity gala to benefit children's arts education. I want you to perform." Sarah stared at the card, her mind racing. "Mr. Hassan, I appreciate the offer, but I haven't performed professionally in 10 years. I couldn't possibly." "The compensation would be substantial," he interrupted, naming a figure that made Sarah's breath catch. "Enough to cover several months of medical bills, I imagine." Sarah's fingers trembled as she picked up the card. Why me? There are countless professional pianists in New York who would jump at this opportunity. Hassan stood, buttoning his suit jacket with practiced elegance. Because when you played tonight, people didn't just hear music, they felt something. That's rare, Miss Matthews. Very rare indeed. He walked to the door but paused before leaving. My assistant will contact you tomorrow with the details. The choice is yours, of course, but consider this. Sometimes life offers us a second chance at our dreams. The question is whether we're brave enough to take it. After he left, Sarah remained seated, staring at the business card in her hands. The embossed letters caught the light. Karim Hassan, CEO, Hassan International Group. Her mind wandered. To her mother's growing stack of medical bills, to Emma's upcoming school expenses, to the piano they'd had to sell. The amount Hassan had offered would solve so many problems, but it would also mean stepping back into a world she'd left behind long ago. The sound of chairs being stacked in the main dining room brought her back to reality. She tucked the card into her pocket and stood, her legs slightly unsteady. As she gathered her things to leave, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in one of the restaurant's mirrors. The woman looking back at her seemed different somehow, as if the music had awakened something that had been dormant for far too long. Outside, the city hummed with its usual nighttime energy. Sarah pulled her coat tighter against the spring chill and began her walk to the subway station. Her fingers unconsciously tapped against her thigh, playing phantom keys as she replayed the evening's events in her mind. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a different future, one where she could be both the mother her daughter needed and the musician she'd always dreamed of becoming. As she descended the subway stairs, Sarah reached into her pocket and touched the business card, its edges sharp against her fingers. Tomorrow would bring decisions and doubts, but for now she let herself feel something she hadn't experienced. In a very long time, hope. The next morning arrived with a mix of uncertainty and anticipation. Sarah sat at her small kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee while Emma happily munched on her cereal. The business card from Karim Hassan lay before her, its elegant typography catching the early morning light that filtered through their modest apartment windows. "Mum, are you going to play the piano again?" Emma asked, her bright eyes full of curiosity. "Like you did at the restaurant," Sarah smiled, reaching over to brush a stray cornflake from her daughter's cheek. "Maybe, sweetheart. Mr. Hassan offered me a chance to perform at a special concert. Like a real concert, with fancy dresses and everything." Emma's excitement was palpable. "Can I come watch?" Before Sarah could respond, her phone buzzed with an unknown number. Her heart skipped a beat as she answered. "Hello?" "Ms. Matthews, this is Alexandra Chen, Mr. Hassan's personal assistant," a crisp voice announced. "Mr. Hassan would like to meet with you this afternoon to discuss the details of your performance. Would 2 p.m. at the Hassan International Hotel be convenient?" Sarah glanced at the clock. She had planned to visit her mother at the care facility, but perhaps she could rearrange her schedule. Yes, 2 p.m. would be fine. After ending the call, Sarah hurried through her morning routine, dropping Emma at school before heading to see her mother. Catherine Matthews sat in her usual spot by the window, her once vibrant face now tired but still maintaining that gentle strength that had always characterized her. "You seem different today," Catherine observed as Sarah arranged fresh flowers in the vase beside her bed. "Something's happened." Sarah sat on the edge of the bed and told her mother about the previous evening's events. As she spoke, she could see tears forming in Catherine's eyes. "Oh, Sarah," her mother reached for her hand. "You lit up just talking about it, just like you used to when you'd practice for hours on end." She squeezed Sarah's hand. "You gave up so much for us." "Mom, no, let me finish," Catherine insisted. "I remember the day you sold your piano. You tried to hide how much it hurt, but I knew. I've carried that guilt with me ever since." "It was the right decision," Sarah assured her. "You needed the medical care, and Emma needed stability." "And now," Catherine asked softly, "what do you need?" The question hung in the air as Sarah considered her response. Before she could answer, a nurse appeared to remind her about her mother's therapy session. Sarah kissed her mother goodbye, promising to return the next day with news about the meeting. The Hassan International Hotel stood like a gleaming monument to luxury in the heart of Manhattan. Sarah smoothed her simple black dress, the nicest thing she owned, and approached the front desk. Within moments, she was escorted to a private elevator that whisked her to the top floor. Alexandra Chen, a sharp-featured woman in her 30s, greeted her with efficient politeness and led her to a spacious office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. Karim Hassan stood at the window, his commanding presence somehow even more pronounced in his own territory. "Ms. Matthews," he turned to greet her. "Thank you for coming. Please sit." As Sarah took her seat, she noticed a familiar figure already seated in the corner, Victor Romano, one of the most celebrated pianists in New York. His presence made her stomach tighten with anxiety. "I've asked Victor to join us as he'll be overseeing your preparation for the gala," Hassan explained. "The event is in 6 weeks, and we need to ensure you're ready." Victor's assessment of Sarah was barely concealed behind a thin veneer of professional courtesy. "Mr. Hassan tells me you studied at Juilliard," he said, his tone suggesting skepticism. "Under whom?" "Professor Eleanor Wright," Sarah replied, watching as recognition flickered across Victor's face. "Interesting," he mused. "And you've spent the last decade serving food?" Hassan interrupted before Sarah could respond. "Victor will work with you 3 times a week. You'll have access to our private music room for practice, and we'll arrange your schedule around your family obligations." The meeting continued with discussions of repertoire choices and performance requirements. Victor's suggestions grew increasingly demanding, each piece more challenging than the last. Sarah recognized his strategy. He was testing her limits, waiting for her to break. "Perhaps we should be more realistic about Ms. Matthews' capabilities," Victor suggested smoothly. "After all, technical skills can deteriorate significantly without constant practice." Sarah felt a familiar fire ignite within her. "Would you like me to demonstrate my capabilities, Mr. Romano?" she asked quietly. "There's a piano right here." Hassan's eyes sparkled with interest as he gestured to the grand piano in the corner of his office. Sarah approached it with measured steps, her heart pounding but her resolve firm. As she sat down, she chose her piece carefully, Rachmaninoff's Prelude in G minor, one of the most technically demanding pieces in the standard repertoire. Her fingers struck the keys with precision and passion, the powerful chords resonating. Through the office, she poured all her frustration, all her determination into the performance, letting the music speak for her. When she finished, she turned to find Victor's expression had shifted from dismissive to thoughtful. Hassan broke the silence. "I believe that settles the question of capability," he said, a hint of satisfaction in his voice. "Now shall we discuss the specifics of your contract?" The following weeks unfolded in a whirlwind of activity for Sarah. Her life, once defined by its predictable routine, now pulsed with a renewed sense of purpose and challenge. The steady rhythm of restaurant work and family care was interwoven with intense practice sessions and grueling lessons with Victor Romano. Victor proved to be a demanding mentor, his expectations bordering on the impossible. "Again," he would say, his voice tinged with impatience as Sarah worked through complex passages. "Your technique is there, but where's the emotion? Make me feel something." Each session left Sarah mentally and physically exhausted, her fingers aching and her spirit often bruised. Yet, beneath Victor's harsh critiques, she sensed a grudging respect beginning to form. There were moments when he would pause, listening intently as she played, and she could see a flicker of something, perhaps recognition, in his eyes. At home, Sarah struggled to balance her new commitments with her responsibilities. Emma, initially excited about her mother's return to music, began to show signs of feeling neglected. One evening, as Sarah prepared to leave for another late-night practice session, Emma clung to her arm. "Do you have to go again?" the little girl asked, her eyes wide with disappointment. "You promised we'd watch a movie together." Sarah knelt down, her heart heavy. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. This is important for us, for our future. I promise we'll have a special day together soon, okay?" As she closed the apartment door behind her, Sarah leaned against it for a moment, the weight of her choices pressing down on her. She took a deep breath, reminding herself why she was doing this. for Emma, for her mother, for the dream she had thought was lost forever. At the Hassan International Hotel, Sarah found solace in the private music room provided for her practice. The space was a musician's paradise, with perfect acoustics and a Steinway grand piano that responded to her touch like an extension of her own body. Here, in the quiet hours of the night, she could lose herself in the music, reconnecting with the part of herself she had suppressed for so long. One night, as she worked through a particularly challenging piece, she sensed a presence in the room. Looking up, she was startled to find Karim Hassan standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Hassan," she said, quickly standing, "I'm sorry, I didn't realize anyone else was here." He waved away her apology. "Please don't stop on my account. I was working late and heard you playing." He moved into the room, his gaze fixed on the piano. "That piece, it's not on the program for the gala, is it?" Sarah shook her head. "No, it's something I've been working on for myself." Hassan nodded, a hint of approval in his eyes. "It's beautiful, raw, unpolished, but there's something there." He paused, studying her for a moment. "You know, when I first heard you play at the restaurant, I saw something in you that reminded me of someone." "Oh?" Sarah prompted, curious. "My mother," he said softly, his usual commanding tone softening. She was a concert pianist, brilliant, passionate about her music, but she gave it up when she married my father. He turned to look out the window, his gaze distant. "She always said she didn't regret her choice, but sometimes I would catch her looking at the piano with such longing." Sarah felt a connection forming, a shared understanding of sacrifice and unfulfilled dreams. "What happened to her?" she asked gently. Hassan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "She passed away when I was young. An accident." He turned back to Sarah, his composure regained. "But that's in the past. What matters is the present and your future. Victor tells me you're making progress." "He's a demanding teacher," Sarah admitted. "As he should be," Hassan replied. "This gala is important, Miss Matthews, not just for me or for the charity, but for you. It's your chance to show the world what you're capable of." As he spoke, Sarah felt the weight of expectation settling on her shoulders. This wasn't just about playing the piano anymore. It was about proving herself, about seizing an opportunity that might never come again. "I won't let you down, Mr. Hassan," she said, her voice firm with determination. He nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I know you. Won't? Now, if you don't mind, would you play that piece again? The one you were working on when I came in?" Sarah returned to the piano, her fingers finding their place on the keys. As she began to play, she poured all her emotions into the music, her fears, her hopes, her determination. She could feel Hassan's presence, silent and attentive, and for a moment she imagined she was playing for her younger self, for the girl who had dreamed of filling concert halls with her music. When she finished, the room was silent, save for the fading echoes of the final notes. Sarah looked up to find Hassan watching her, his expression thoughtful. "Keep working on that piece," he said softly. "It has potential." As he left the room, Sarah turned back to the piano, her mind buzzing with new ideas and possibilities. The gala was still weeks away, but in that moment she felt as though she had already begun her comeback performance, not just as a pianist, but as the woman she had always wanted to be. As the weeks progressed, Sarah found herself caught in a delicate balancing act. Her days were a carefully orchestrated symphony of responsibilities: mornings with Emma, afternoons caring for her mother, evenings at the restaurant, and late nights dedicated to practice. The pressure was immense, but with each passing day she felt herself growing stronger, more confident in her abilities. One particularly challenging afternoon, Sarah arrived at the hospital to visit her mother, only to find Catherine in the midst of a health scare. The doctors had been running tests all morning, their faces etched with concern. "Mom, what's going on?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling as she took her mother's frail hand. Catherine managed a weak smile. "Oh, it's nothing to worry about, dear. Just some routine checks." But Sarah could see the worry in her mother's eyes, the same worry reflected in the sympathetic glances of the nurses. As she sat by her mother's bedside, Her mind raced with thoughts of the mounting medical bills and the precarious nature of their financial situation. Later that evening, as Sarah prepared for her lesson with Victor, her phone buzzed with a message from Emma's teacher. There was an issue at school. Emma had been acting out, her grades slipping. The teacher suggested a parent-teacher conference as soon as possible. Sarah's heart sank. She knew she had been less present for Emma lately, but she hadn't realized how much it was affecting her daughter. Guilt gnawed at her as she made her way to the hotel for her lesson. Victor was in a particularly critical mood that night. "Your technique is improving," he conceded, "but there's still something missing. You're playing the notes, but you're not telling a story. Where's the emotion, the passion?" Sarah's fingers stumbled over the keys, her concentration fractured. By the day's events, Victor's frown deepened. "Is this how you plan to perform at the gala? Karim Hassan didn't bring you here for mediocrity." Something inside Sarah snapped. "You want emotion," she retorted, her voice sharp. "How's this for a story? I spent my morning watching my daughter leave for school with disappointment in her eyes because I couldn't help her with her project. I spent my afternoon wondering if my mother's going to make it through another round of tests. And now I'm here, trying to prove myself to someone who's been nothing but condescending since the moment we met." Her outburst echoed in the practice room. Victor stared at her, momentarily stunned into silence. Then, to Sarah's surprise, his expression softened. "Now that," he said quietly, "is what I've been waiting to hear." Sarah blinked, confused. "What?" Victor moved to sit beside her on the piano bench. "Sarah, you have the technical skills. What you've been missing is the willingness to be vulnerable, to let your real emotions show in your playing. The struggles you just described, that's your story. That's what needs to come through in your music." For the first time since they'd begun working together, Sarah saw Victor not as an intimidating maestro, but as a fellow artist who understood the power of personal experience in music. "Let's try something," Victor suggested. "Close your eyes. Think about your daughter, your mother, all the challenges you're facing. Now play. Don't think about the notes or the technique. Just play what you feel." Sarah took a deep breath and let her fingers find the keys. What emerged was a haunting, improvised melody that seemed to capture all the love, fear, hope, and determination that had been building inside her. When she finished, she opened her eyes to find Victor nodding approvingly. "That's what we need for the gala," he said. "That honesty, that raw emotion. The audience doesn't want perfection. They want to feel something real." As Sarah left the hotel that night, she felt a shift in her perspective. She realized that her struggles weren't obstacles to her music. They were the very essence of it. The next morning, Sarah made a decision. She called the restaurant and took a personal day, something she hadn't done in years. She spent the morning at Emma's school, meeting with her teacher and reconnecting with her daughter. In the afternoon, she visited her mother, bringing along a small keyboard. "What's this?" Catherine asked, her eyes lighting up at the sight of the instrument. "I thought we could play together," Sarah said, setting up the keyboard, "like we used to when I was little." As they played simple duets, Sarah saw the years melt away from her mother's face. For a moment, they weren't patient and caregiver. They were just a mother and daughter, sharing the joy of music. That evening, as Sarah practiced in the hotel's music room, she let all the emotions of the day flow through her fingers. The music that emerged was powerful, poignant, and undeniably authentic. Unbeknownst to her, Karim Hassan stood in the shadows of the doorway, listening. A small smile played on his lips as he recognized the transformation in her playing. This was the artist he had glimpsed that night in the restaurant. Not just talented, but truthful, able to translate life's complexities into the universal language of music. As the last notes faded, Hassan slipped away, more certain than ever that he had made the right choice in Sarah Matthews. The gala was approaching, and with it the opportunity to introduce the world to a truly remarkable talent. As the date of the gala drew nearer, Sarah's world seemed to spin faster on its axis. Her newfound emotional connection to her music had reinvigorated her playing, but it had also opened floodgates of feeling that she had long kept carefully dammed. One evening, as she was finishing up a particularly intense practice session with Victor, She received an urgent call from the care facility. Her mother had taken a turn for the worse and was being rushed to the hospital. Sarah's heart pounded as she raced across town, her mind a whirlwind of worry and fear. At the hospital, Sarah found her mother pale and weak, hooked up to various machines. The doctor's words blurred together, something about complications, need for more aggressive treatment, significant costs. Sarah nodded numbly, her hand clutching her mother's. "Don't worry about me," Catherine whispered, her voice barely audible over the beeping machines. "Your music. It's important. Don't give up on your dream again." Sarah fought back tears. "Mum, you're more important than any concert. I can't lose you." As she left the hospital in the early hours of the morning, Sarah felt the weight of her responsibilities pressing down on her. She had to be at Emma's school in a few hours for a parent-teacher conference, then at the restaurant for her shift, and later another rehearsal with Victor. The gala was only 2 weeks away, and there was still so much to do. Sleep-deprived and emotionally drained, Sarah arrived at Emma's school. The teacher's words were kind but firm. Emma was struggling, acting out, clearly affected by the recent changes in their home life. Sarah's guilt intensified as she realized how much her pursuit of this musical opportunity had impacted her daughter. "I'll do better," Sarah promised, both to the teacher and to herself. "I'll find a way to balance everything." But as she rushed to her shift at the restaurant, she wondered how she could possibly keep that promise. The medical bills were mounting. Emma needed her, and the gala loomed ever closer. Something had to give, but what? At the restaurant, Sarah moved through her tasks mechanically, her mind elsewhere. As she was clearing a table, she overheard a conversation that made her freeze. "Oh, did you hear about Karim Hassan's latest project?" one patron was saying to another. "Apparently, he's grooming some unknown pianist for his charity gala. Word is, she's a single mum he discovered waiting tables." The other patron scoffed. "Sounds like a publicity stunt to me. Hassan's always looking for ways to improve his image. I bet this pianist is just a pretty face he can use to get some good press." Sarah's cheeks burned as she hurried away from the table. Is that what people thought? That she was just some pawn in Hassan's game of public relations? The doubts that had been niggling at the back of her mind suddenly roared to the forefront. That night's rehearsal with Victor was a disaster. Sarah's fingers felt clumsy, her timing off. Every mistake grated on her nerves until finally, in a moment of frustration, she slammed her hands down on the keys. "I can't do this," she said, her voice breaking. "It's too much. I'm letting everyone down. My daughter, my mother, you, Mr. Hassan." Victor, usually so stern, surprised her by placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Sarah, listen to me. What you're feeling right now, this doubt, this fear, it's all part of the process. Every great artist goes through this. The question is, what will you do with these emotions?" Sarah looked at him confused. "What do you mean?" "Music isn't just about playing the right notes," Victor explained. "It's about channeling your experiences, your struggles, your joys. Everything you're going through right now, use it. Let it fuel your performance." As Sarah pondered Victor's words, the door to the practice room opened. Karim Hassan stepped in, his expression concerned. "Is everything all right?" he asked. "I heard raised voices." Sarah stood, wiping away a stray tear. "Mr. Hassan, I don't know if I can do this. My mother's in the hospital, my daughter needs me, and I overheard some people saying this is all just a publicity stunt for you." Hassan's face hardened for a moment before softening. "Sarah, when I first heard you play, I saw a spark of something extraordinary. This isn't about publicity or charity. It's about music, about giving a voice to talent that deserves to be heard." He paused, his gaze intense. "But if you want to walk away, I understand. The choice is yours." Sarah looked from Hassan to Victor, then down at the piano. Her fingers hovered over the keys, trembling slightly. In that moment, she thought of her mother's words in the hospital, of Emma's face lighting up when she played their old upright, of the joy she felt when she lost herself in the music. Taking a deep breath, Sarah sat back down at the piano. "No," she said firmly. "I'm not walking away. This music, this opportunity, it's part of who I am. I just need to find a way to make it all work." Hassan nodded, a small smile playing at his lips. Then let's make it work. Tell me what you need. As they began to discuss arrangements for more flexible rehearsal times and additional support for her family, Sarah felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead would be challenging, but for the first time in years, she felt like she was truly on the right path. The music that flowed from her fingers that night was infused with all the complex emotions of the day: fear, determination, hope, and an unwavering love for the art that had always been her true calling. The following days unfolded in a whirlwind of activity, as Sarah, with the newfound support of Hassan and his team, worked to strike a balance between her commitments. The Hassan International Group arranged for top-notch home care for Catherine, allowing Sarah to spend quality time with her mother without sacrificing her practice schedule. Emma was enrolled in an after-school music program, reigniting the little girl's own passion for piano and giving her a sense of connection to her mother's journey. Sarah's days became a carefully choreographed dance of responsibility and artistry. Mornings were devoted to Emma, helping with homework and sharing breakfast before school. Afternoons found her at her mother's bedside, often with a portable keyboard, filling the sterile hospital room with warm melodies that seemed to breathe life into Catherine's weary frame. Evenings were split between the restaurant, where Sarah insisted on keeping some shifts to maintain her independence, and intense practice sessions with Victor. The demanding maestro had softened somewhat since their breakthrough, pushing Sarah to channel her experiences into her music rather than compartmentalizing them. "Your life is not separate from your art," Victor would remind her. "They are one and the same. Let your struggles, your joys, your fears, let them all flow through your fingers and into the keys." As the gala drew nearer, Sarah found herself facing a new challenge: the scrutiny of the press. Word had gotten out about Hassan's Waitress-turned-pianist project, and reporters were clamoring for interviews. Sarah, unused to such attention, felt overwhelmed by the probing questions and flashing cameras. It was during one such ambush outside the restaurant that Sarah encountered an unexpected ally, as a particularly persistent reporter pressed her for details about her relationship with Hassan. A commanding voice cut through the chaos. "I believe Ms. Matthews has made it clear she's not interested in commenting at this time." Sarah turned to find Karim Hassan himself standing there, his presence immediately scattering the gathered press. He guided her to a waiting car, his hand a steady pressure on her back. Once inside the vehicle, Sarah let out a shaky breath. "Thank you, Mr. Hassan. I'm not used to all this attention." Hassan's expression was sympathetic, but firm. "The attention is part of the package. I'm afraid, but you don't have to face it alone." He paused, studying her for a moment. "How are you holding up, Sarah, truly?" The use of her first name, so unusual from the typically formal businessman, caught Sarah off guard. She found herself opening up, sharing her fears about the upcoming performance, her worry for her mother, her guilt about Emma. Hassan listened intently, his usual mask of cool detachment slipping to reveal genuine concern. "You're carrying a heavy burden," he said softly. "But remember why you're doing this. Your music has the power to touch people, to make a difference, including in the lives of those you love." As they arrived at the hotel for her practice session, Hassan surprised her again. "I have something to show you," he said, leading her not to the usual practice room but to a large conference area. Inside, Sarah gasped. The room had been transformed into a mini concert hall, complete with a small stage and several rows of chairs. And in those chairs sat the entire staff of Le Petit Jardin, her co-workers, friends who had supported her throughout this journey. "We thought you could use a friendly audience for a practice run," Hassan explained, a rare smile playing at his lips. "Consider it a dress rehearsal." Overwhelmed with emotion, Sarah took her place at the piano. As she began to play, she felt the nerves that had plagued her for weeks begin to melt away. Here, surrounded by people who knew her story, who had witnessed her struggles and triumphs, she found the courage to truly express herself through her music. The piece she played was the one she had been working on privately, a composition that told the story of her life, of dreams deferred and rediscovered, of love and sacrifice and hope. As the final notes faded, she looked up to find her audience in tears, their applause thunderous in the small space. Marcus, her manager from the restaurant, was the first to reach her, enveloping her in a warm hug. "We always knew you were special, Sarah," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Now the whole world will know it too." As Sarah mingled with her friends and colleagues, accepting their congratulations and well wishes, she caught sight of Hassan, standing off to the side, watching the scene with an unreadable expression. When their eyes met, he gave her a small nod of approval before slipping out of the room. That night, as Sarah tucked Emma into bed, her daughter asked sleepily, "Mom, are you going to be famous?" Sarah smiled, stroking her daughter's hair. "I don't know about famous, sweetie, but I'm going to play my music and I'm going to do my best to make you and Grandma proud." Emma's eyes fluttered closed. "You already make us proud, Mom. You're our hero." As Sarah left her daughter's room, she felt a sense of peace wash over her. The gala was just days away, and while the challenge ahead was daunting, she knew she was ready. She had found her harmony in her music, in her family, and in herself. Whatever the future held, she would face it with grace, determination, and the power of her newfound voice. The morning of the gala arrived with a mixture of anticipation and nervous energy. Sarah woke before her alarm, her mind already racing through the pieces she would perform that evening. As she moved through her morning routine, she could feel the weight of expectations settling on her shoulders. Emma, sensing her mother's nervous excitement, was unusually cooperative, getting ready for school without complaint. As they shared breakfast, the little girl reached across the table and squeezed Sarah's hand. "You're going to be amazing, Mom," she said with all the certainty of a child's faith. "I just know it." Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes. "Thank you, sweetie. That means everything to me." After dropping Emma off at school, Sarah made her way to the hospital for a final visit with her mother before the big night. Catherine was sitting up in bed, looking stronger than she had in weeks. A nurse was helping her into a wheelchair. "Mom," Sarah asked, confused. "What's going on?" Catherine's eyes twinkled with mischief. "Did you think I was going to miss my daughter's big debut? Mr. Hassan arranged for me to attend the gala. I'll be right in the front row cheering you on." Overwhelmed with emotion, Sarah embraced her mother, careful of the IV lines. "Oh, Mom, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything, dear," Catherine replied, patting her daughter's cheek. "Just play your heart out tonight. That's all I need." As Sarah left the hospital, her phone buzzed with a message from Victor. "Final run-through at 2 p.m. Don't be late." Despite the brusque tone, Sarah could sense the underlying excitement in her mentor's words. The hours seemed to fly by. Before she knew it, Sarah found herself in the grand ballroom of the Hassan International Hotel, seated at the magnificent Steinway grand piano that had been brought in specially for the event. Victor stood nearby, his usual stern expression softened by a hint of pride. "Remember," he said as Sarah flexed her fingers over the keys, "this is your moment. All those hours of practice, all the sacrifices, they've led to this. Trust in your preparation and let the music flow through you." As they ran through the program one last time, Sarah felt a calm settling over her. The pieces were a part of her now, as familiar as her own heartbeat. Even the original composition she had prepared, a piece that wove together themes of struggle, love, and redemption, felt natural under her fingers. Just as they finished, Karim Hassan entered the ballroom. He looked impeccable in a tailored tuxedo, every inch the powerful businessman. But as he approached Sarah, there was a warmth in his eyes that she had come to recognize over the past weeks. "Are you ready?" he asked simply. Sarah nodded, surprised by her own confidence. "I am." Hassan smiled, a rare, genuine expression that transformed his usually serious face. "Good, because there's someone here who would like to wish you luck." From behind, Hassan stepped an elegant woman in her 60s, her silver hair swept up in a sophisticated chignon. Sarah's breath caught as she recognized one of the world's most renowned pianists, Elena Rossi. "Ms. Rossi," Sarah breathed, starstruck. It's an honor to meet you." Elena Rossi's eyes crinkled with warmth as she took Sarah's hands in her own. "The honor is mine, my dear. Karim has told me all about you, and I insisted on coming to hear you play. Your journey, it reminds me so much of my own." As Elena shared words of encouragement and advice, Sarah felt a final piece click into place. This was more than just a performance or a chance at a new career. It was a continuation of a legacy, a connection to all the artists who had come before her, who had poured their lives and souls into their music. The hours ticked by, and soon the ballroom began to fill with guests. Sarah, secluded in a private room, could hear the murmur of the crowd growing. She took deep breaths, running through her mental preparations. A soft knock at the door revealed Emma and Catherine, both dressed in their finest. Emma rushed to hug her mother, while Catherine wheeled herself over, her eyes shining with pride. "We're so proud of you, Sarah," Catherine said, squeezing her daughter's hand. "No matter what happens tonight, remember that. You've already won by following your heart." Emma nodded vigorously. "Yeah, Mom, you're already our star." Surrounded by the love of her family, Sarah felt the last of her nerves melt away. She was ready. As the lights in the ballroom dimmed and Karim Hassan took the stage to introduce her, Sarah stood in the wings, her heart beating in time with the applause. This was it, the moment she had been working towards, dreaming of for so long. "Ladies and gentlemen," Hassan's voice rang out, "it is my great pleasure to introduce to you a remarkable talent, a woman whose passion and perseverance embody the very spirit of music itself. Please welcome Sarah Matthews." Taking a deep breath, Sarah stepped out onto the stage. The spotlights were bright, the audience a sea of expectant faces. But as she took her seat at the piano, her fingers hovering over the keys, all she could see were the smiling faces of her mother and daughter in the front row. With a sense of calm purpose, Sarah began to play. The first notes rang out clear and true, carrying with them all the love, struggle, and hope that had brought her to this moment. As the music filled the room, Sarah felt herself soaring, carried, aloft by the power of her own dreams finally taking flight. The ballroom fell into a hushed silence as Sarah's fingers danced across the keys, weaving a tapestry of sound that held the audience spellbound. Her opening piece, a challenging Chopin nocturne, flowed from her with a grace and emotion that belied the technical difficulty. As the final notes faded, there was a moment of breathless quiet before the room erupted in enthusiastic applause. Sarah's eyes found Emma and Catherine in the front row, their faces beaming with pride. Drawing strength from their presence, she moved into her next piece, a lively Rachmaninoff that showcased her newfound confidence and technical prowess. Victor, watching from the wings, nodded in approval as Sarah navigated the complex rhythms and harmonies with apparent ease. As the evening progressed, Sarah could feel the energy in the room shifting. The polite, reserved atmosphere of the gala's opening had given way to genuine excitement and engagement. Even the most jaded members of New York's elite cultural scene were leaning forward in their seats, captivated by the raw emotion and skill on display. Between pieces, Sarah caught glimpses of familiar faces in the crowd. There was Marcus, her manager from the restaurant, his eyes shining with unshed tears. Near him sat several of her co-workers, all of whom had pooled their tips to buy evening wear suitable for the gala. Their presence, a reminder of where she had come from and the support that had carried her through, filled Sarah with a renewed sense of purpose. As she prepared for her penultimate piece, Sarah took a deep breath. This was the composition she had been working on privately, the one that told her own story. As she began to play, she poured everything into the music, her struggles as a single mother, the pain of watching her own mother's illness, the joy of rediscovering her passion, and the hope for a brighter future. The piece started softly, with hesitant, searching notes that slowly built in complexity and emotion. As it progressed, Sarah could feel herself getting lost in the music, every joy and heartache of the past months flowing through her fingers and into the keys. When she reached the final, triumphant crescendo, she was barely aware of the tears streaming down her face. As the last note hung in the air, there was a moment of profound silence. Then, like a dam breaking, the audience burst into a standing ovation. Sarah opened her eyes to see Elena Rossi on her feet, applauding vigorously, genuine admiration shining in her eyes. Karim Hassan, usually so composed, was wiping at his eyes, a rare display of emotion from the stoic businessman. But it was the sight of Emma and Catherine that truly moved Sarah. Her daughter was jumping up and down, clapping with all her might, while Catherine sat in her wheelchair, tears flowing freely down her cheeks as she mouthed, "I'm so proud of you." As the applause continued, Sarah prepared for her final piece, a duet with Elena Rossi that had been kept as a surprise for the audience. As the legendary pianist joined her on stage, Sarah felt a sense of coming full circle. This was more than just a performance. It was a passing of the torch, a recognition of her place in the ongoing story of music. Together, Sarah and Elena played a piece that showcased both Sarah's fresh, emotional style and Elena's seasoned brilliance. Their fingers flew over the keys in perfect synchronization, creating a sound that was greater than the sum of its parts. As they played the final chords, the audience rose once again, their applause thunderous and sustained. Karim Hassan returned to the stage, his usual composure barely containing his excitement. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice carrying over the continuing applause, "I think we can all agree that we have witnessed something truly extraordinary tonight. Sarah Matthews, we thank you for sharing your incredible talent with us." As Sarah stood to take her final bow, she felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. This moment, this triumph, was not hers alone. It belonged to Emma, who had sacrificed time with her mother without complaint, to Catherine, who had always believed in her daughter's talent, to Victor, whose demanding tutelage had pushed her to new heights, to her friends from the restaurant, who had supported her every step of the way, and yes, even to Karim Hassan, whose unexpected offer had set this entire journey in motion. As she left the stage, Sarah was immediately enveloped in a group hug by Emma and Catherine. "You did it, Mom," Emma exclaimed, her face glowing with pride. "You were magnificent, darling," Catherine added, her voice thick with emotion. Before Sarah could respond, she found herself surrounded by well-wishers. Music critics praised her technical skill and emotional depth. Patrons of the arts pressed business cards into her hands, eager to discuss future performances. Even jaded socialites were moved to sincerity, congratulating her on a truly memorable performance. Through it all, Sarah felt as if she were floating, buoyed by the realization that her life had irrevocably changed. As the crowd began to thin, she found herself face to face with Karim Hassan and Elena Rossi. "Sarah," Elena said warmly, clasping her hands, "you have a rare gift. Your music speaks to the soul. I would be honored to mentor you as you begin your professional career." Hassan nodded in agreement. "And the Hassan Foundation would be proud to sponsor your debut tour," he added, a hint of a smile playing at his lips. "That is if you're interested in pursuing this path." Sarah looked from Elena to Hassan, then back to her family. Emma was practically vibrating with excitement, while Catherine nodded encouragingly. In that moment, Sarah knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter in her life, one filled with music, challenges, and endless possibilities. With a heart full of gratitude and hope, Sarah smiled. "I'm ready," she said simply. "Let's make some music." 1 year had passed since the night of the gala that had changed everything for Sarah Matthews. The whirlwind that followed her debut performance had been both exhilarating and challenging, a symphony of new experiences that had tested her resolve and reinforced her passion for music. Sarah stood backstage at Carnegie Hall, her heart racing with a familiar mix of excitement and nerves. This was the final stop on her debut tour, sponsored by the Hassan Foundation and guided by the mentorship of Elena Rossi. The past 12 months had been a blur of performances, interviews, and intense practice sessions, but tonight felt special. It was a homecoming of sorts, a chance to share her music with the city where her journey had begun. As she waited for her cue, Sarah's mind drifted back over the year's events. There had been triumphs, standing ovations in concert halls across the country, glowing reviews from critics who praised her emotional depth and technical brilliance, a debut album that had climbed the classical charts. But there had also been challenges, long hours away from Emma, the ongoing worry about her mother's health, moments of self-doubt when the pressure seemed overwhelming. Through it all, Sarah had held on to the lessons she'd learned during those intense weeks of preparation for the gala. She channeled her experiences, both joyful and painful, into her music. Every performance was a story, a sharing of her soul with the audience. A soft touch on her arm brought Sarah back to the present. Emma, now 10 and growing more beautiful by the day, smiled up at her mother. "Are you ready, Mom?" she asked, her eyes shining with pride. Sarah knelt down, straightening the bow in her daughter's hair. "I am now," she said, drawing strength from Emma's unwavering belief in her. Just then, Catherine wheeled herself over, looking healthier than she had in years. The advanced treatments made possible by Sarah's success had worked wonders, giving Catherine a new lease on life. "You two better hurry," she said with a wink. "Your adoring public awaits." As if on cue, the stage manager appeared. 2 minutes. "Ms. Matthews." Sarah took a deep breath, smoothing down her elegant concert gown. So much had changed, but in many ways, the most important things had remained the same. Her family was still her anchor, her music still her passion. As she prepared to step onto the stage, Sarah felt a presence beside her. Karim Hassan, impeccable as always in a tailored suit, gave her a nod of encouragement. Their relationship had evolved over the past year, moving from patron and protégé to something closer to friendship. His belief in her talent had never wavered, and his support had opened doors she once thought permanently closed. "Break a leg," he said simply, the hint of a smile playing at his lips. Sarah returned the smile, grateful for his continued support. "Thank you, Karim, for everything." As the announcer's voice boomed through the hall, introducing her to the eager audience, Sarah felt a sense of calm settle over her. This was where she belonged. She stepped out onto the stage, the bright lights momentarily blinding her. As her eyes adjusted, she saw the sea of faces before her, strangers and friends, critics and admirers, all waiting to be moved by her music. In the front row, she spotted Emma and Catherine, their faces beaming with pride. Beside them sat Victor, his usual stern expression softened by a rare smile. And there in the wings stood Elena Rossi, ready to join her for the evening's final duet. Sarah took her place at the gleaming grand piano, her fingers hovering over the keys. In that moment, she thought of the long journey that had brought her here, from a struggling single mother to an acclaimed concert pianist. She thought of the little girl who used to play on an out-of-tune upright, dreaming of this very stage. She thought of all the people who had believed in her, supported her, pushed her to reach for her dreams. With a deep breath, Sarah began to play. The first notes rang out clear and true, filling the hallowed hall with a melody that spoke of struggle and triumph, of love and perseverance, of dreams deferred and finally realized. As the music flowed from her fingers, Sarah felt a profound sense of gratitude and joy. This performance, like every performance, was a gift. To her audience, to her loved ones, and to herself. It was a reminder that it's never too late to pursue your passion, that with love and determination, it's possible to overcome any obstacle. As the final piece of the evening approached, Sarah glanced off stage to see Elena Rossi preparing to join her. The legendary pianist gave her an encouraging nod, and together they launched into a duet that showcased both Sarah's fresh, emotional style and Elena's seasoned brilliance. Their fingers danced across the keys in perfect harmony, creating a sound that was greater than the sum of its parts. It was a passing of the torch, a blending of generations, a celebration of the enduring power of music to connect and inspire. As the last notes faded away, there was a moment of breathless silence before the audience erupted into thunderous applause. Sarah rose from the bench, her heart full to bursting, and took her bow. As she gazed out at the standing ovation before her, she saw not just an audience, but a representation of her journey. The challenges overcome, the support received, the dreams realized. In that moment, Sarah knew that this was not an end, but a beginning. There would be more music to create, more stories to tell through her playing, more lives to touch with her art. And she was ready for it all, her spirit buoyed by the love of her family, the support of her mentors, and the pure joy of making music. As she left the stage, Emma ran to embrace her, followed closely by Catherine. Surrounded by the love of her family and the glow of her success, Sarah felt a profound sense of peace. She had found her harmony in her music, in her life, and in herself. The melody of her new life was just beginning, and it promised to be more beautiful and complex than she had ever imagined. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope Sarah's journey from waitress to acclaimed pianist has touched your hearts and inspired you. To continue this emotional voyage, we've prepared a special playlist featuring equally captivating stories of triumph over adversity. You can find it by clicking the link to your left. If you enjoyed this tale, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give the video a thumbs up. Every day we bring you unique stories that explore the complexity of life and the power of perseverance. We can't wait to read your thoughts in the comments section. Until next time, keep believing in the magic of your own dreams.